Welcome to the Irish NFL Show, and welcome indeed to our Week 5 Talking Points, brought to you by Buskers on the Ball in Dublin's Temple Bar. You can check out Buskers on the Ball on Sunday evenings, where they show a selection of all the NFL live games, and also Red Zone, if that's your preference, every weekend. Well, we'll get to all the talking points from last weekend's NFL action, where Week 5 saw the Niners dismantle the Eagles. It saw the Raiders pull out a win for their embattled head coach, Josh McDaniels. The Patriots, however, limped to another embarrassing loss, which puts McDaniel's mentor, Bill Belichick, very much in the hot seat in New England. And we also, Brian, saw the Jags complete a winning 2-game stand in London. You were there. How was it?
It was really, really enjoyable. One thing I discussed on the group was the enormity of how many Bills fans turned up. And I don't necessarily mean Bills fans from UK, Ireland, across Europe. Like, there was a significant amount of fans that travelled over from the States. And we've been to quite a few games over the last few years where there's a bigger following of one team rather than the other. We saw it last year for large parts of the Packers-Giants game. But Sunday, I was blown away by the amount of Bills fans there. But unfortunately, the air was out in the building come 4:45, 10:06, because it just never really went the way in which many Bills fans expected on Sunday. But great day. Weather was fantastic. And look, you'll see it yourself on Sunday. It's a great venue for an NFL game.
Yeah, Bills Mafia are something else, though, aren't they? I mean, you look at fan bases that if it wasn't your own team winning a Lombardi, that you'd love to see get their hands on it because of what they bring to the table. Bills have to be right up there. I know Bengals, another fan base we've talked about, Colin. We won't overlook the Broncos, who really get behind their team as well. Not that there's much to get behind at the moment, unfortunately. And look, all three of us speak from the pit of humility, which is the 1-4 start to the season. So we can chop all that up as we go through. But look, let's start with some of the brighter spots from Week 5. And Colin, one thing that was kind of a relief certainly for Bengals fans, but also for the football fraternity as a whole, Joe Burrow looks like he's something close to being back, or at least taking a step on that slightly hinky calf in the right direction against the Cardinals. It wasn't always pretty, but a lot of signs at least of some return to health.
Yeah, it's been a while coming. I mean, we're into October. It is, I suppose, the season of witches and ghouls and Halloween. And I was kind of going to think about Alfred Hitchcock and a theme in terms of Burrow. This for the Bengals, right? He had a 1943 movie, Shadow of a Doubt, and that was what had crept in perhaps for you and I, Connor, in relation to the Bengals, because we were both very high on this team going into the season. They really looked set up, and then the calf injury, and it has plagued him. And you could see over the last few weeks he hasn't been able to throw properly. There was all the stuff with Jamar Chase and always being open, etc. But he did look like it was such a difference at the weekend. And was he perfect? No. Is he absolutely back to where he can be? No, that will take a little bit of time. But did he show that I think he is overcoming the calf strain? The concern will always be, does it come back? Does he tweak it again? But there was a moment where he escaped pressure. And he was like a border collie where they turn in circles as he was running away from the defense. And the ball actually didn't really end up, I think it was an 8-yard gain or thereabouts. But it was the fact that he was able to turn. He was able to put pressure on the calf. That was enormously pleasing. And obviously, Jamar Chase had himself a day, and they found ways to get him open. So I think if you're a Bengals fan or you're high on the Bengals, this is what you hope for. This is what you wanted to see. And given results elsewhere in the North, they're not as far back as maybe they might have expected.
And Brian, I know we were saying even on the group, like, let's not get carried away with this. It is only the Cardinals at the end of the day. All due respect to Arizona, like they showed up as strong as they might, given the relatively limited resources at their disposal. But I suppose the one thing that'll be encouraging for Bengals fans and for Burrow fans in general, of whom there are many, the deep ball is there. Like, he was able to get the ball downfield to Chase, a couple of trademark Burrow throws, hitting Chase in full stride, and when that happens, there's not much you can do to stop it.
Yeah, kind of similar aspects to 2 years ago when Chase came into the league. Kind of had that little bit of a bright start, kind of eased off slightly, and then it kind of came good around week 5 or week 6, and it kind of they shot on from there. Yeah, 317 yards and 3 touchdowns to chase. Like, it was, we're talking about Joe Burrow being back. I don't necessarily think he's back better, is probably the word I'd use compared to what we've seen recently. But Chase certainly looked like he was back to himself. And T. Higgins, interesting enough, didn't play on Sunday because of the injury. I wonder, are they trying to spread this offense around to all the various different players, because he's a player that's been discussed potentially. That's one that could get away if they don't get the contract resolved for him. But I don't know whether he just needs to go back to Chase. The reality is, and you touched on there as well, the Cardinals are being outscored 44-7 in the fourth quarter this season. So I always felt that this was a game that was a nice for them to try and get the offense back up and running, and it certainly was the case. But the next three, Connor, they've got Seattle, 49ers, and the Bills. I mean, we're talking about them being back in the divisional hunt. They are, because of the nature of the results. But here's the true test. True test of the injury as well, going up against Seattle's defense on Sunday.
I mean, that decides your season right there. You go 0-3 in those games and it's done. Like, no coming back from 1-7. And even splitting them going 2-1, which would be a pretty good result against those three teams, is not the easiest thing in the world to do. That's that's the acid test. All right, I don't think there's any two ways about that. Interesting though, when you touch on the Cardinals, and I sat down and watched the majority of this game live. Actually, I thought, let's see how it goes. I hadn't really seen the Cardinals in depth, and wanted to check in on the Bengals development, considering, like yourself, Colin, I picked them as the Super Bowl winners this year. And one thing I thought about the Cardinals, they're so creative. They work with what they've got. But once James Conner went down, they kind of got away from the running game a little bit. They lost their confidence. They use Rondale Moore a little bit in that position. They have another rookie running back who didn't look too bad once they realized that they just couldn't rely on Dobbs to sling the ball down the field. They're limited, but it's hard to argue that Gannon isn't getting the most out of what's at his disposal there. As you say, Brian, like, they tend to make a fight of it till halftime. That's been their trademark this season, and then fall away off a cliff. It's like it's just not in them to sustain a challenge, particularly against one of the top shelf teams in the NFL. But they're not a bad watch, it has to be said. There are worse teams you could be stuck looking at of a Sunday. And between us, we probably support three of them. But anyway, that's just a story for another day.
Yeah, just on the guys like Connor, you just on there, not yourself, but the other running back, but James Conner, he's gone on IR today, and he's going to be gone for 4 games, and that's a huge blow for him, because he has been a bright spark for him this season. He's kind of a forgotten man in many ways, and running back after leaving the Steelers previously, and he's kind of floated on the radar. But he's had quite a productive season, albeit playing in this Cards team, and unfortunately now he's gone for 4. So it'll be interesting to see how they can address that this weekend when they go into LA to play the Rams. Are they going to rely on the rookies? So that could be a bit of a game changer for them.
Which brings us nicely, Colin, to one of the other talking points that we wanted to touch on. And, it's unfortunate, but you get to this stage of the season and the butcher's bill is already starting to look very lengthy for some teams in particular. Other teams have 1 or 2 particularly costly injuries. We've dealt at length with what the Aaron Rodgers injury obviously did to the Jets, and everybody knows that one. But unfortunately, it's starting to happen across the league now, where significant injuries are piling up. And probably one of the more significant ones is that one to Anthony Richardson at the Colts. He's got a sprained AC. Looks like, according to coach Shane Steichen, he could be out for as much as a month, which is a real shame considering how the Colts had started the season, because we've seen the Gardner Minshew show there. It's not going to be enough to get much going for them when they had looked quite frisky and a lot better than a lot of people expected them to be.
Yeah, if he's a month on the sidelines, Connor, is he going to be akin to James Stewart in Rear Window, and we see him in a booth in the box with a pair of binoculars looking down onto the field at Gardner Minshew. It is, look, I mean, to see him go out now, he's kind of acquired different types of injuries in the first few weeks. So people have been pointing out there have been a number of injuries, but the first one I think he kind of threw himself into. The next one I felt was really unlucky. He just happened to hit his head. And this one, well, it can happen to QBs. Obviously, it's happened so quickly, but the flashes we've seen have been outstanding. They really have. And it looks like, this is a guy, again, Brian and I talked about this last week. He played 13 games at college level. He was so raw, and he has really looked, like he belongs. And I think that Shane Steichen has done a fantastic job, you would have to say, at managing both Richardson, but also when Gardner Minshew has had to come in. Like, that's not an easy thing. And it probably highlights the fact that they have a competent backup and they have a plan for when the backup has come in, that they've been able to continue and to win. And my hope, I suppose, is that Richardson doesn't have to go on IR, that we do get to continue to see him, especially with Jonathan Taylor and that contract having been sorted out there. But the Colts have shown maybe that they have learned the lessons of Peyton Manning and Tom Moore, and that when you have a QB that goes down, you have a competent backup that can come in and play. But you don't want to be relying on Minshew if it's going to be 4, 5, 6 weeks.
Yeah, you remind me of a great anecdote in the book, the games that changed the game, where there's a conversation on the sideline when the Colts are talking about Manning, and the conversations around the backup doesn't seem to be getting many reps here, lads. What's the story? And the response was, well, if he gets injured, we're screwed. We don't plan for screwed. That seems to be where a lot of teams are this season. But to your point, and to Shane Steichen's credit, not in fairness, where the Colts are, also good to see that offensive explosion from Zach Moss at the weekend. Now that they've got Jonathan Taylor back as well, there's more than one dimension to that Colts offense. The Giants offense, Brian, on the other hand, has been a major, major problem, one of the poorest in the league, not helped by the Daniel Jones injury at the weekend. It's a neck injury, which I think probably caused a sharp intake of breath among Giants fans, considering his history with neck injuries, and a particularly bad one that he's had back in the day. But he's questionable now for week 6, and that's not what the Giants need right now.
No, and it's unfortunately for Daniel Jones, he's playing against an offensive line which essentially isn't there. He's like, the weekend, there was makeshift players coming off practice squads, coming in, players from various teams picked up off the scrap heap and off the street, and coming in and playing right guard and left tackle, and it was a complete mess, to be honest. He was sacked 11 times last week, 10 of which were on him last week, 11 in total in the game against Seattle, and another handful this weekend. And it's sort of a concern for many a Giants fan over the past few weeks. It was brought up in week 1 when he wasn't taking out a game in the fourth quarter when the game was outside, as to why you would leave a quarterback in there when he's completely crippled by a poor offensive line. And now he's got the injury. Some slight relief today that he's suggesting he will play. In all likelihood, he will play this weekend. It's not kind of a return to the previous neck injury where he had the operation, but we never really got a true kind of understanding of what the particular operation was. They called it a procedure, and at the time it only came out in late July that he went and did that during the off season. I mean, if he continues to play behind that offensive line, he's gonna be out of season. He'll be out at some stage, because like any quarterback we see, you can only go as far as your offensive line brings you. Like, the Giants have bigger problems than just the offensive line. The whole thing is, let's be honest, it's a complete mess at the moment. From the coaching to the team, the head coach looks deflated. He doesn't seem to be bringing the energy that he brought last year, and he seems very flat in the press conferences. And it's night and day compared to what we saw from last year. He was lighting fires on players, and he seemed to be lighting fires on people at the start of the season, but seems to have fallen off very quickly. And there's a comment in there around the Dolphins from Roy Fitzgerald around the team that are going to go on and challenge within the AFC East, but like, they certainly did a number on the Giants the weekend. It didn't come as a surprise, bearing in mind how explosive they've been offensively this season.
Yeah. Speaking of offensive explosions, Colin, I know it's the Hitchcockian theme this week, but to paraphrase a line from Star Wars, I felt a tremble in the force over the weekend, as though a million fantasy managers cried out in pain. Justin Jefferson hamstring injury. That's going to explode a lot of people's fantasy hopes, not least the Vikings fantasy of going all the way this year.
Yeah, like that's a nightmare for them, because even at the weekend before the injury happened, he wasn't getting the ball as much this week, but all the attention was on him. And because of that, other players were able to come in. So losing him has a huge impact in terms of Jefferson's ability, but also what Jefferson makes defenses do. Everything that could go wrong for the Vikings is going wrong. And I said before the start of the season, I think this could be a team that are better than last year, and yet they lose more games. I don't think they're certainly that much worse than last year. Whether they're better or not, that might be questionable, but I certainly don't think they're that much worse. But everything has gone against them. And where are they now? Kirk Cousins, this is it. This is the last year of his contract. Florio often talks about purple purgatory. They're truly in it now. You're on mute there, Connor. Yep.
I swiftly
Get you
muted and unmuted myself there. I was quicker than Tyreek Hill on the mute button there, and it cost me. I was going to say, I find the Vikings a really frustrating watch. And to your point, and I know I spent a lot of the offseason kind of dumping on them and saying like all of that karma that they had built up from winning all those one-score games last season was going to catch them, which it has. But they're also very unfortunate. I mean, I don't know which team, and we'll get to the Ravens later on, I don't know which team is doing more to damage its own chances right now. It's the Ravens with the drops or the Vikings with the ball security issues. Just every week they have these costly fumbles. Every week they seem to be in good positions and just let it slightly slip away from them. I mean, they gave the Chiefs as good as the Chiefs have gotten from anyone, with the exception of the Lions, who beat them, and still came up short in a game that they well near could have won. You know, and some gutsy play calling from Kevin O'Connell. You know, Flores is probably, it's going to take a while to improve that defense, right? That's never a one-season endeavor at the best of times, but they're right there. And to be fair to them, I know the old Parcells quote about you are what your record says you are. I kind of feel the Vikings, to be fair to them, are slightly better than the record says they were. If they were markedly worse than the record said they were last year, to your point, they probably have improved. And, you know, they're not necessarily seeing the rewards in the win-loss column at the moment. And it is very frustrating to watch them.
Well, just on that. So you look at the games, and we're not going to drill into every game, but week 1 against the Bucs, very careless with the ball. Week 2 against the Eagles, gave them a real good count. You know, in hindsight, a lot of teams seem to be giving the Eagles a game, and obviously the Eagles are coming out on top. And then there was other games where they're just so careless with the ball. But like on Sunday, they'll feel aggrieved. You know, they get a pass interference. The flag is picked up. You got Chiefs players taking their helmets off, which is supposed to be a 15-yard, penalty in the league. Like, I can understand why Kevin O'Connell is very frustrated at the end. But yeah, they're thereabouts, and yet they find the ways to just do Vikings things, which we always talk about, which is to just shoot themselves in the foot. They've got the Bears this weekend. It'll be interesting to see how they scheme against the Bears. Bearing in mind, as Colin has rightly called out, the fact that Jefferson's in there, you're constantly having to kind of factor in his presence on the field. He's no longer there this weekend. Jordan Addison and other players will have to step up.
Yeah. Back to London, it's worth kind of spending some time, Brian, looking at the Bills right now. You know, their injury list is one of the lengthiest in the league right now. They, very unfortunate non-contact injury for Tre'Davious White last week. He's gone for the season. Matt Milano now out indefinitely. Their key linebacker, which is not something that they wanted to see. Daquan Jones, D lineman, gone down as well. That's another indefinite one. He might actually be gone for the season. I think that's a torn pectoral muscle. And that overshadowed, we've been talking since the start of the season about where will they be when Von Miller comes back, and that'll be the perfect injection. Now it's like he's coming to relieve the mortally wounded at the front. It's been carnage for the Bills, unfortunately. A very costly trip to London, and they're looking pretty dinged up at the moment.
Yeah, there's several players that went down. Johnson was another one that was down for quite some time during the game. It looks like he's fine. But Matt Milano for me is like the biggest loss. He's such an underrated player. Essentially, he's the player that calls this defense. I was looking at some of the numbers, like in 12 games he's missed over his career for the Bills. They're 7-5, and they've given up over 24 points in every game. He is the marquee player there. He probably doesn't get the credit around the league because of players, and they bring in Leonard Floyd, who's really good, and Von Miller's going to come back, but he's the guy that's been keeping it together over the course of the last 4 to 5 years. You could see it after the game. We went to the Sean McDermott press conference, and the questions for large parts of the press conference weren't even about the game. It was about the injuries, and they looked very dejected about the enormity of losing some of the players. In terms of the game, like we've seen, just on a column today briefly, like there's such a narrative out there that the Bills have brought this on themselves by the nature of traveling over on a Friday. Now Bills fans are suggesting that it was an unfair advantage because the Jags played there last week and they've been kind of briefed on how to deal with these things, having come over for so many years, and obviously the length of period in which they were in London. The Bills knew last May when the schedule came out. In fact, they probably knew before that, because we always discuss the fact that the teams get their schedule before we see the schedule. They would have known the scenario around the Jags coming. And they made that decision. Sean McDermott openly said it in the press conference. We made that definitive decision to come on Friday morning. The Giants and the Packers came on Friday morning last year, as did the Saints Vikings. I know it's an equal playing field in that instance because both of them arrived on the same day. But surely I would have thought, bearing in mind that they knew that the Jags were over, they would have looked to do similar to what the Titans and the Ravens have done. They're already there. They flew out on Monday morning, got to try to get as much of the week there. They took a different approach. They took an approach that most of the teams have been taking over the last 4 to 5 years, which is arrive on Friday, walk through on Friday afternoon, bit of a practice on Saturday morning, play the game and get out of Stansted on Sunday night. They looked flat. They punted on the first 3 drives. They got 1 first down before. They'd only had 1 first down with 4 minutes to go in the first quarter. The Jags, I thought the Jags played a strong game, bearing in mind, okay, we can take the fact that they've been there, but I think we saw a strong game from Trevor Lawrence. And if it wasn't for 2 particular fumbles in the game, I think the game would have been put away a lot sooner. The Bills had an opportunity near the end, but good win for the Jags. But I'm not buying this piece around that the league giving the Jags advantage, because they had the opportunity to get out there as early as they could.
What do you make of that one, Colin? Like, is there a bit of complacency creeping in there for the Bills? Was that their downfall here? And that, you know, you might think, you look at that on the schedule when you're doing your plan and figure we probably got enough to handle the Jags, London or not, regardless of the fact, to Brian's point, they knew well that the Jags were there from the previous week. They might have thought, on balance, it's a better idea to roll into town. Let's hope we just have enough to get over the line, and then we're out of there quickly, and we don't have to spend too much time out of our comfort.
Well, I think that one of the reasons why Bills fans are so upset, as Brian is kind of talking about, is Roger Goodell's comments, right? Because Roger Goodell goes on stage and he's, you know, maybe, you know, he didn't mean it, but you're a hostage to fortune once you put the comments out there. And he said, well, this is an experiment because we have one team that's going to be in London for weeks, and we have another team coming in late. So we're going to see how this works. And this might tell us a lot in terms of the long-term future. And every team out there, right, I think all 32 have some grievance of some sort with Roger Goodell. And so when something like that happens and Roger Goodell has put that out there, that's manna, right? Because people are going to eat that up and they're going to be able to point to it and say, well, this is what the NFL. And you know, I don't know if it was complacency, because I think I saw a stat earlier today that the Jags and the Bills have played each other 19 times since the Jags came into existence, and the Jags are currently 10-9 up. So going into this weekend's game, you know, I think that the Bills may have known what they were up against, but it's difficult when you're trying to juggle where they are and coming off the back of the Dolphins win. And I certainly didn't pay enough attention to how much that probably took out of them. I think also you're going to have, in the same way in any trial, right? You have expert witnesses on either side. You'll have sports scientists that tell you go in later, right? And just try and hit the ground running. You'll go in, you'll stay awake. Your body will. You're not going to take the time to adjust, and you may as well just get in and get out. Now, obviously, the Jags, they looked fresher. But I think
that sounds like how you'd approach a transatlantic stag party, though, rather than how you'd approach a high-level elite athletic endeavor.
But the question should be, you know, like, I mean, I know when people will say, like, you know, it's a difference in terms of 5 hours, 3 hours, California, but the extra 2 hours and flying east do make a difference.
Right. Sorry, Brian, you wanted to make a point before we wrap there?
Just another podcast today. Josh Allen made some comments. I don't think he did it. I don't think he was being pedantic. He was just kind of making the point. He goes, he didn't even feel like he was in London, because essentially all he saw was, he said the only thing he noticed was a big difference was he was driving on the other side of the road on the team bus to the stadium on the morning of the game and after the game, because essentially they were brought in that morning, brought to do the practice, and then they were putting cotton wool for the over the course of the weekend, and then obviously brought to the stadium on Sunday morning, and then they were gone out of Stansted by 9:30, 10:15 on Sunday night. And Sean McDermott did say in the press conference, if they are selected again to come over, they would certainly consider changing their options. But he did say, the column said there was a fine art to this. They had taken advice from several different teams across the league who've come in on the Friday. The difference being all those teams are playing each other on the Sunday, have all come in on the Friday of late, as opposed to the Jags who've been there for the bones of 14 days.
So any strategy that works is a winning one, right? Ex post facto validation is always the best. See, you told you it would work. We'll move into the second segment of our Week 5 talking points, and a reminder to everybody watching us on YouTube Live that if you miss out on any or you want to recap, we do put the talking points out as separate podcasts. We break them up into 3 separate podcasts following the night's discussion. Want to talk about which teams are hurting the most right now. And Colm, one of the ones that occurs near the top of the list after their second straight embarrassing loss in a row, and kind of shocking that we're talking about them in these terms, but here we are. The Patriots really taken to the woodshed for the second week in a row. Is it too much to suggest we could be looking at Bill Belichick's last season?
Certainly it is. It's the biggest wobble we have seen since Brady and Belichick won that first Super Bowl. I think that is safe to say. I mean, you're coming off the worst loss of his Patriots tenure, followed by the second worst loss of his Patriots tenure, and the big issue it's the fact that they scored 3 points, right, in both of those games. And if you go back to the game before, they beat the Jets, but they scored 15 points. So they have scored 18 points in their last 3 games. I mean, the offense is awful, and they've had some bad injuries. Matthew Judon, obviously they brought in JC Jackson because Gonzalez has gone down. But again, and I know Fred has a comment, and we'll come to the Cowboys in terms of CeeDee Lamb saying, he doesn't know what the Cowboys' offensive identity is. What's the Patriots' offensive identity? And there's been huge amount of talk this week across all of the podcasts, and to what exactly is going wrong. Has the game on offense, are things passing Bill Belichick by? I don't know if that's the case, but I certainly do know that the last time they were blooding a young QB in Tom Brady, things did look very different, right? You had they pointed out, I think it was on the Ringer podcast, when Brady came in that time, Kurt Warner had just won a Super Bowl, coming off a couple of years previous packing groceries. Trent Dilfer, this was not the Patrick Mahomes, the Josh Allens, and what we see now, right? What the Dolphins are doing, what the Niners are doing, etc. So the way in which you look to develop your young QB is very different. I don't know whether it's the last year. I think ultimately that's a conversation that Kraft and Belichick will have to have. And what if they end up with a high draft pick? What if they can get Drake May or Caleb Williams? I don't know, because they're playing the Raiders. It will be very interesting. They've got an enormous game against the Raiders. Obviously, Belichick and Josh McDaniels know each other very well. So that should be a fascinating battle. But I don't think I've ever seen the Patriots wobble, since Brady came in. I think you've got to go back to me playing Madden on the Sega Mega Drive and the Patriots being one of the worst teams.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I saw a stat over the weekend that they haven't lost by more than 30 points 2 games in a row since 1972. And there have been a lot of bad Patriots teams before the good times started rolling. But that's a long way you got to stretch back since.
What year was that, Connor? 1970?
72.
Well, that's ironic, because they've been outscored 72-3 in the past 2 weeks. So there you go.
Oh, we're all piling on now. We all feel brave taking shots at the Patriots now that they finally.
Well, then let's keep it going.
Dynasty is over. But like a couple of counterpoints there. Sorry, Brian. No, you plenty to say, but a couple of counterpoints there. Right. Firstly, if you look back to the coaching triumph, the 2 greatest coaching triumph in Bill Belichick's career, right, and certainly now what we've seen in hindsight, taking the Patriots to the playoffs with Mac Jones and engineering that Super Bowl triumph when they took out Mahomes-led Chiefs in the AFC Championship game, and then went on to shut down McVay's Rams, albeit the Jared Goff version rather than the Matthew Stafford version in the Super Bowl. And we know that Belichick can still scheme. We were full of praise for what they managed to do to slow down the Dolphins, to nullify Tyreek Hill as a threat, even though they didn't actually win that game. And they also had a pretty good defensive effort against the Eagles. So there's plenty of plenty of that old Belichick magic, that defensive magic in there. But the Bill O'Brien experiment, I mean, it's hard to know whether you can blame any of this on Bill O'Brien, because Mac Jones has just been so bad. But there's so much to fix there, and you'd wonder if Kraft isn't thinking, there's an offensive wunderkind or two out here. You know, Jared Mayo, I know, is the in-house candidate that there's a lot of talk now that might be preferred if they want to move on quietly. And you can't imagine that they'll ever do something as crazy as sack Belichick. Like, that's just not going to happen. He'll be allowed to move on in some way, shape, or form on his own terms. You would think it's a kind of a nudge, unsubtle though it may be, towards retirements rather than a sack. And you just can't see that happening in a million years. But, you know, one or two more poor results and, you know, we're well past on to Cincinnati.
He doesn't strike me as the type of head coach, despite the poor performance this season, that would consider resigning. I could be completely wrong. He could do a Fergie at the end of the season and we could be all completely, totally taken back by it. Well, maybe not, to bear in mind, United at that time had just come off winning the league. But point being, last year everybody blamed Judge and Patricia, on the offensive, the poor offensive play, which we saw last year. But in fact, it's only got worse this year. Bill O'Brien was supposed to be coming in to fix this, but I think it's becoming more evident as we go on. Unfortunately, it doesn't sound nice, but it doesn't seem to matter who's coaching and who's scheming offensively. That the quarterback is just not good enough. He's been relieved of his duties in the past 2 games. I know Belichick played it down in Dallas, that he was taking him out for reason as to why he didn't want him to see him get hurt. But when you have it 2 games in a row, and the play and the interception, like, he was picked twice again he was picked once in Dallas, and obviously he was hit from behind, fumbled, and obviously they scooped it and ran in. But it was a similar one last week. Like, the one, we're talking about a quarterback who's in the league 3 years now and hit the self-awareness to know when to get rid of the ball. The interception for me is inexcusable. There seems to be deeper issues there. Obviously we've had a bit of a joke today around the nature of the phone calls going in to all the local Boston radio sports channels. Is very much of the opinion that it was all Brady, and Belichick is just holding the paper book there on the sideline. But look, it'd be interesting to see how they react this weekend. I think they've got a really tough game this weekend, bearing in mind the Raiders have just come off a Monday Night Football. If the Raiders win, despite all the grievances we've spoke with the head coach, they're back to 500. They're 3-3 coming off this weekend if they are to win. And Jacoby Myers is on the other sideline. Maybe he'll throw the ball over to the Patriots this year instead of the other way around. Or maybe he'll score the winning touchdown and give it to the Patriots 2 years in a row. But interestingly enough, if they lose this weekend, and this is the same scenario that the Giants have been dealing with, they play the Bills the following week, and then they play the Dolphins the following week. There is a scenario that they could be 1-6 very quickly, and things will start to get out of hand. 1-7, in fact, sorry.
Colin, let's move on, and sorry to do this here, but we got to talk Broncos, because they're very much in the hurt locker. Just a week after things seemed like they were looking up following that win over the Bears in the Futility Bowl, and it's striking looking back on this result. I mean, this was a game we'd circled in the calendar. It was all supposed to be so different. This was supposed to be the Nathaniel Hackett revenge game, which ultimately it did turn out to be. But this was one of the higher profile fixtures in the list when we were looking ahead. Obviously, the Rodgers injury put a stop to that. But also, really, it's the Broncos' form that rendered it, you know, a much less enticing prospect than it otherwise might have been. Where do you go from here in Denver?
You probably try and get as much trade value as you can from anyone who will take the players on the roster. Look, this I talked about this before. This is chickens coming home to roost. The Broncos have unfortunately been overrated. They are like when you see, like, where is the production? Like, again, Russell Wilson is. And one of the talking points, I think, in Denver in the wake, right, when people are still waking up, there's still a lot of delusion out there. But Russell Wilson isn't the problem, but he's also not the solution to the problems. Okay, he has been fine this year. Okay, but the defense is historically bad. Like, it's breaking DVOA records for how bad it is. I can only imagine Aaron Schatz working away on his calculator and his graphs and trying to figure stuff out in terms of what is going on there. There's no real explosion. They start well and then it all falls apart. Teams can run all over them. They can bully them. They don't look all that interested. And the problem is that they have huge contracts. This is a team that does not have cap space next year. This is a team that spent a huge amount of money on Mike McGlinchey, who can run block, but he can't pass block. And that is the concern. There are a couple of young, talented players, but in terms of which teams are hurting the most, the Broncos are in a world of pain because of the Russell Wilson contract. Because even if they get a really high pick and they take a QB of the future, because Russ is 35, they're lumbered with his contract, and nothing has worked. And Sean Payton made those comments about Nathaniel Hackett. I don't think they were wrong in that he pointed the finger at everybody in the organization, said there were 20 fingers, but everyone forgot about that part, and then he walked them back, and now ultimately he's ended up with egg on his face. Because when you lose to Zach Wilson, and when you lose to the teams that the Broncos have lost to, he's been out coached by Josh McDaniels. Like, there are a number of teams here who might have different head coaches next year, and ultimately the Broncos have lost to them. So I think things are pretty bleak in Denver, to be honest.
I know, Brian, we love to read lots into what happens on the sideline, but when you get a kind of tasty vignette like Peyton barking at Wilson after that strip sack, you know the tempers are fraying if they're not already beyond frayed in Denver.
Yeah, I think some people have tried to run that one back that he wasn't in particular getting on Russell Wilson's back. The general consensus initially was that he was trying to say just throw it out of bounds. McCollum is rightly called out to defense, but he also suggested Russell Wilson's not the problem this season. But I don't want to drill into too many games. Like, but the second half, they went punt, fumble, punt, touchdown, fumble. Like, it doesn't strike me as a quarterback that's doing a lot. You know, it's inconsistency. We've seen good points from me. You made a good point a few weeks ago, Connor, where he had the deep ball, and then he kept trying to, continue with that as opposed to just playing his game and methodical drives. He got away from what he was doing right in the first place in this game. It's just so many inconsistencies. But Colin was right, for a defense that was going into the season suggested as one of the best in the league, top 10. It's fallen away very badly. The Jets were 0-5 in the red zone. They ended up with a lot of field goals. If they punch them in, game is probably over before we get to that scenario where Zach Wilson is throwing a needless interception in the red zone at the end of the game. Fantastic interception. We got to call it out to Surtain, with all due respect to him. But he's playing in a defense that is just not playing at the caliber in which he should be at, because he's a fantastic player. And Colum's talking about trades. Like, is it against everyone's possibility that he go and seek a trade for a player of that level? Because Sean Payton will be there next year. That's the comfort for him. He can move players on now and go to the owner and say we have to think about next season already. And he knows he's going to be there next year. Well, Bill Belichick may not be there next year. And he might be not in the position to go to Kraft and say, we got to focus on next year. At least Sean Payton has that comfort that he could move players on now and look to rebuild. But saddled with that contract is the problem, ultimately.
Before we move on, let's talk about the only winless team left in the league. And look, it wasn't necessarily expected to be markedly different than this column, but the Panthers are 0-5. They might have expected a little bit better, and particularly when they look at, and we've touched on this before in previous shows, when they look at what Texas are getting, or the Texans are getting out of CJ Stroud, when they look at what the Colts were getting out of Anthony Richardson, they haven't seen Bryce Young hit those kind of heights, and it's been a little bit frustrating, albeit that you expect growing pains with a rookie QB, and they know they don't have an awful lot of weapons, and they got rid of the one weapon they had, DJ Moore, to the Bears, and boy, how he showed up on Thursday night. My one and only mention of that. But it's still frustrating in parts for Carolina.
Well, Connor, I suppose if you had asked me this, or we'd been discussing this 6 hours ago, I'd have said, yeah, look, it's disappointing, and but it's still very early, and it's going to take time, and they don't have the weapons, and there was talk last week about trading. Then Frank Reich got in front of the microphone today, and everything changed. Like, if people haven't seen it, Frank Reich basically said, reading between the lines, I was forced to pick Bryce Young. I did not want to pick Bryce Young. We are just gone past week 5 of year 1 of the Frank Reich tenure, and he's talking about difficult meetings with the owner, and the owner basically meddling. Like, this is not good. This is not good in any way, shape, or form. And the head coach is basically pointing to the owner and saying, this is not what I wanted. And other people have come out, lots of people who know Frank Reich. Stephen Holder, who is incredibly well respected around the league, has said he spoke to Reich before the draft and kind of said, CJ Stroud is your guy because of everything. He got to know Reich when Reich was in Indianapolis. Like, Stroud was exactly the kind of prototype for what Reich wanted. So yeah, it's enormously concerning when the owner is getting, is involved there, and the head coach is already calling it out. And Adam Thielen has been decent, and we've seen Bryce Young take baby steps. But yeah, when you see what Stroud is doing, when you see what Richardson is doing, and the fact that they are 0-5 and they have an owner who is very impatient, and that is one of the issues. You got to feel a little bit for Frank Reich. You go from the Jim Irsay to David Tepper. I saw a joke earlier on Twitter saying maybe if Mike McCarthy gets the boot, Frank can go down to Dallas and complete the trifecta.
Let's not forget as well, in the off season, and this is the problem with the off season. Colin always says it. We all get carried away with so much stuff that happens. They were lauding this team. They were lauding this coaching staff coming in.
We're talking about the Avengers. Wasn't that the phrase that was used? The coaching Avengers.
That was a fantastic piece that Aidan O'Reilly put together for us at the time, and obviously on the back of a really good interview, which Colin did with the local Panthers beat writer. Yeah, and Colin was talking about there about the stereotype quarterback in which Reich looks after. I recall it was a pre-your time, kind of when we were doing our draft coverage. Leading up to the draft, I think it was 2 weeks out, and everybody was convinced it was CJ Stroud. And then all of a sudden, the wheels turned very quickly. And I remember when we were doing a Showtime, we were saying it's quite surprising that you get to a stage. Usually, at that stage of the process, you're kind of well used to who it's going to be. The wheels flipped overnight with that scenario, and it was very much evident, having seen some of the coverage in the draft, that it was the owner who was certainly getting involved in marking the people's cards that he wanted that particular quarterback. And it does have that feel of, he's not my guy. I'm kind of stuck with him. But I still thought they would have had a couple of wins by now. I thought there would have been, bearing in mind and I know you're talking about DJ being traded and stuff, but they brought in experienced players, and they had a strong defense, but they've been crippled with injuries as well. So the things just don't look like they're going to improve. They're in Miami this weekend. Doesn't seem to be getting any better for them, unfortunately.
No, and that's not a lot easier.
Actually, one more, Connor. If you recall, CJ Stroud's pro day, and Josh McCown, the quarterback coach, said, when you move to Carolina, we'll do a bit more basketball together. Well, they probably haven't seen the court together since.
They had everybody. They brought the entire coaching staff, if you remember, for that. Yeah. The entire sideline was basically all of the Panthers coaching staff. So yeah, it is. That's going to be interesting to see how that gets resolved. But ultimately, I think Fred said it in the comments. We've said it on the show previously. It's an owner's league. Billionaires get what billionaires want, and it won't matter if David Tepper made a mistake, because somebody else will get blamed for it, and someone else will come in to pick up the pieces.
Right, we move on to segment 3 and a very different lofty height of the league. Maybe this is where we get the Vertigo reference in, Colin. Is it? Were you saving that one up? I'm trying to call out the Hitchcock references in advance. I'm very rarely able to stay a step ahead of you. But we wanted to talk about who's the top dog in the NFC, because on Sunday night we saw the 49ers go to town on Dallas. I mean, Dallas, being Dallas, had talked up their defense as the best defense in the league. Yeah, they lost Trayvon Diggs, and that put a dent in that. And unfortunately for them, they lost Van Der Esch over the weekend as well. But 42-10, the Niners, Brian, looked absolutely awesome in that game in all 3 phases. Colin has said that, they probably have the best starters in the league, and they look to be playing pretty near their potential right now. The only argument you might have against where they'll go from here is, have they peaked a little bit too soon? But right now it's all humming and it looks amazing. I
don't think they're peaking too soon. I just think genuinely, I believe they're the best team in the league. I selected them to go to the Super Bowl. And I felt when we did our off-season piece, and in particular the live show, we were discussing the impact of Porter this year, having had the off-season to kind of get his head around expectations of being a 49ers quarterback, and obviously the playbook and everything that will be expected him under Kyle Shanahan. Like last season, great, he came in, he played so well, but literally he was thrown in And it was credit from that he played as well as he did, but obviously he's got the talent. But this season we're seeing he has been intercepted you. Now, there has been a few games where better defensive play and he would have been intercepted because teams have got in his face and he has been a bit wild with some of the throws. But I mean, you're going to put a marker down like that on Sunday and you're putting 3 touchdowns to Kittle, who we touched on it again earlier this season. He kind of obviously starts slowly. He's more of a blocking tight end, and then there's one game where they see it as an absolute given that this is the breakout game for him. And defensively, and we're always talking about the marquee players, but like the likes of Warner and Grimlaw, their tackling is immense. And you just need to have players across the board that are just playing at a level beyond, for me, even Chiefs are beyond the Eagles right now. I think to put a marker down like that on a team that they just beat, bearing in mind in the divisional round, and squeezed by the year before. I know we're getting away from different seasons, but for me right now, you could argue they have a difficult game this weekend in Cleveland, bearing in mind how well their defense is played, not so much the offense, but right now I find it difficult to see who's going to stop them. I think ultimately it will come down to when they play the Eagles in November in terms of who gets the number 1 seed, because that will be crucial.
Yeah. I think it was one of the weeks when you might not have been here for the Thursday show, Colin, when you were on your way to London, but we were talking about, myself and Brian, about Jimmy Garoppolo and Brock Purdy, and saying, Brock Purdy is Jimmy Garoppolo plus, but I think we've clearly damned him with faint praise. Like, what he really looks like in that Shanahan offense is the quarterback that Shanahan had hoped Jimmy Garoppolo would be, clean, pretty much mistake-free, as Brian said, hasn't thrown a pick so far this season. I know it's slightly easier when you're thrown to the Kittles and the Ayuks and the Deebo Samuels that they've got the luxuries that they have, but it's a thing of beauty at times, that Shanahan offense. Like, you look at those kind of starburst patterns, they just were able to pull the Cowboys apart and then hit players for 12 to 15 yard gains over the middle constantly. They did whatever they wanted. Even, the delightful little cameo near the end of the game for the same play that the Lions had used, the flea flicker that they threw to Laporta for the touchdown. Shanahan did exactly the same thing for Kittle. It was almost like, a little Easter egg thrown in there that, by the way, I can do that too if I want.
Yeah, and they are like they're magnificent. Like, I talked about it. I don't know if Connor was that last week. Where what's really interesting is the way in which Mike McDaniel and Kyle Shanahan are very similar in certain ways, but then you look at the way, so they both use motion so much, they're both coming up with new kind of ways to attack. But what the Dolphins are trying to do is get their guys down as far down the field as they can. What the Niners are looking to do is get their guys open, get the ball in their hand, and then have them break tackles. And, it was Kittle's turn the other night. Another day it'll be Christian McCaffrey. Another day it'll be Deebo. They have so many weapons, and Kyle is just brilliant. But you asked in terms of what was the reference going to be, and Vertigo is a magnificent movie. But 8 years previous, Hitchcock had done a movie called Stage Fright, and that's what it felt like for the Cowboys. Like, they were Micah Parsons, who I have given so much praise to, was an absolute non-factor. And if you compare the way in which the Cowboys defense played to the way in which the 49ers defense played, and with Fred Warner, right? I don't know if people have seen the clip. So there's one part where the Cowboys are running a mesh play, right? Warner he breaks up, he goes between the two Cowboys, takes both of those guys out, and then chases Dak down. So he destroyed the play at the receiver level, and then he goes and sacks the QB. I mean, like, what they are doing on both sides of the ball right now is ahead of where everyone else is. Can they continue to do that throughout the season? We need to see. There shouldn't be any reason they can't, because they have guys on the sidelines and on the field who are more than capable of it. Injuries are potentially the piece that could slow them down, but they are so much fun to watch, right? Because you watch the offense and your eyes are drawn to guys doing different things. And with the defense, my goodness, Nick Bosa is, again, you could just have a player cam on Nick Bosa because of how disruptive he is, but then Warner is behind him, blowing up plays as well. They're magnificent.
And they're getting Diamador Lenore and all these guys making big plays week in, week out as well. We don't even have time to talk about them. They have so many playmakers on that defense. But let's just draw back the lens here and look a bit broader, because the game that we wanted to see last year in the NFC was Eagles-Niners. It didn't live up to the hype, unfortunately, because of the Purdy injury and the 49ers running out of quarterbacks. Fingers crossed this year that is the clash that we get, because it's hard to see anybody else emerging at that, if you like, Avengers level threat on the NFC side. The Eagles, haven't hit the heights that the Niners have, but at the same time, they look deeply, deeply impressive in terms of what they can do. Some ridiculous early season question marks about Jalen Hurts, but over the weekend, he was responsible for converting 6 third downs with his legs. They don't look like they're getting out of third gear at the moment, that they're still able to account for most teams very, very comfortably. Like, it's hard to see anybody else at that level or anywhere near it in the NFC. And I'm starting to wonder, even with the depth that's in the AFC, is there anyone there who can take either of these two out, Brian?
I find it very difficult to put up an argument as to who can put them out of measure, take them out of measure and beat either of them. It's so difficult to see. Like, I'm not suggesting the Packers any, but you see the Packers getting beaten last night. Like, this is what gives some teams, and we talk about the Vikings, like, who are 1-4. This gives those type of teams a little bit of comfort that they can catch up and make the playoffs. But like the difference between these top two and then beyond that is it's night and day. And the Cowboys, when the Cowboys beat the Giants in week 1, and like, with all due respect, they put such a marker down, and they did it against the Jets as well. Everybody was lauding this Cowboys defense and this team. They were put to bed last weekend in terms of, the reality is there's a big gap starting to appear between, and we had it in the AFC for quite a period of time, and it's been the Chiefs, Bengals, and Bills, and thereafter we're starting to quickly see in the NFC now it's evolving, where there's 2 teams that are standing out. They're going to play each other next month, so ultimately it's going to come down to who wins that game, gets home field advantage, because it's hard to see how look. It's the NFL; it's inevitable that they will drop a game or two. I mean, I just don't think it's winning both teams to go unbeaten for throughout the course of the season. But it's so difficult to see anybody really. Like, the Lions are a great story, but we know what the Lions are. I think Dan Campbell's putting a really great product on the field, but they have lost games. Maybe Seattle are a team, if they keep playing with Pete Carroll and he can float under the radar, they could put it up to the 49ers, and maybe they're the team that can knock the 49ers off when they go into Seattle. But it's very difficult to see past these two right now.
Colm, on the AFC side, like, obviously there's the Chiefs, who haven't necessarily looked anything like their best, and often haven't needed to, but they got knocked off by the Lions. And we've already talked about how the Vikings ran them damn close at the weekend and maybe could have emerged with the win there. We spent an awful lot of time talking over the last 2 seasons about just the incredible depth and the incredible quarterback play that's available in the AFC. And it's, the more exciting of the 2 conferences in terms of the overall quality of teams. But to Brian's point, it is kind of hard to see who comes out that side of the draw, who can match either of these 2 teams, the Eagles and the Niners, playing the way they are right now and looking the way they look.
Yeah, but it's very early. I mean, and again, the Chiefs do this, right? The Chiefs are kind of in that mode where early on in the season, a lot of the times they're figuring stuff out. We have seen them, at times, I have seen them have the same record of the Broncos in recent years, only to go on to host the AFC Championship game. I mean, what the Chiefs are doing, we're giving the Niners all the flowers currently, but nobody has hosted an AFC Championship game 5 years in a row. Okay, nobody's hosted the championship game more than 3 times in a row. The other team to run them close to go to 4 championship games, though one of them was on the road, was Andy Reid and the Eagles. Common denominator there, the head coach. That's how good he is. But like, think about, I suppose, the Super Bowl winners. Like, the Chiefs had rocky moments last year. The Rams had a lot of rocky moments. The Rams had a really rocky November in the year that they won it. The Buccaneers really
they didn't win
only
a single
got going
game that November, did they? They lost every single game.
Yeah,
in November.
exactly. Kevin O'Connell talked to us about that when he was on. The Buccaneers took an awfully long time to get going. Even the Chiefs in 2020 had moments, and as you've talked about the Patriots in 2019. So there is a long season, and there will be a response by teams to what the Niners are doing. Now, again, I recognize the Niners are an exceptional team. The Dolphins are an exceptional team. But there are coaches out there. They will be looking at the tape. They will be looking for weaknesses. And there will be a response to this. And then we'll have to see how the Niners respond. So this is, you can look great for, stretches, but we have to see what it looks like in January, because that's ultimately when it really matters. We want to be entertained, and we're rightly talking them all up. But I think let's not get too carried away with the Chiefs, especially. They've been there, they've done that. They have the best quarterback in the league, and they find ways to win. Last year, I saw a stat like against the bottom 6 teams last year, the Chiefs didn't win by more than a touchdown, yet they still ran out being worthy Super Bowl champions.
Colin, I noticed in the comments your Sega Mega Drive reference earlier on that deep console cut is inviting some admiring gazes. Shane Brennan saying Mega Drive is quite the throwback, and Fred saying Tecmo Bowl on Nintendo. There's a blast from the past.
Tecmo Bowl was
Jerry Rice versus Bo Jackson. When we played Tecmo Bowl, you weren't allowed to pick the Raiders because it was unfair to have Bo Jackson. He was just too good. Speaking of Jacksons, though, and one curiosity from the weekend that I wanted to talk about before we move on to our pre-trade deadline speculation, Lamar Jackson, who had, and you might not know this from looking at the result, actually had an insane game over the weekend, but let down by 7 drops from his receivers. Don't take my word for it. PFF had Lamar at a 93.4 passer rating, Brian, and that's not the QBR or the passer rating, the NFL stat. That's 93.4 out of 100. He pretty much on a play-by-play basis couldn't have put the ball in better places. 7 drops cost them the game, and there's nothing Todd Monken can do about that. There's nothing Lamar Jackson can do about that. The supporting cast letting him down in Baltimore.
We said on the show, you weren't there, Conor, last Thursday, that in order for the Steelers to win, they have to make this one a very scrappy affair, and this is probably one of the scrappiest games we've seen this season. The Ravens will still wonder how they didn't win this game in the second half. Like a punt block, turnover, an interception by Joey Porter. Yeah, okay, Lamar.
Safety.
Safety. They did everything in their power to give the Steelers the game. Steelers' offense was very bad. We're talking about bad offenses tonight. We're talking about the Patriots' offense, the Giants' offense. Let's not get away from the Steelers' offense. This Steelers' offense is, with the exception of a few bright plays, the Pickens this season has been poor, and their defense has carried them. They've beaten, ironically enough, they've beaten the Ravens and they've beaten the Browns, both games at home this season, and they're top of the division. But they're ugly wins. They're playing scrappy. Mike Tomlin I think he's very much aware of what he's got around them and how he can navigate victories. They got away with that one on Sunday. That's with all due respect. Lamar shouldn't have shown that interception. He'd love to have it back. We can have all the stats. And PFF can put all the numbers again. Their harsh reality is when the game was there to be won, Lamar did a very stupid interception, and Joey Porter gets his first interception in the NFL. It was a game in which the Ravens, because it's all right losing this game in September, October. The harsh reality is it will count come December. These games count because you get into ties and you get into who won which game in the division. It's huge.
If that had gone the other way, let's not forget they would have swept their divisional rivals in their own buildings. They would have had 3 away wins, which is absolutely priceless in terms of coming out of that AFC North. Colin, I'm conscious of time here, and we wanted to talk about some pre-trade deadline speculation. You kind of cast ahead earlier when we were talking about some of the teams that might be looking to shop players. We need to talk about Kirk Cousins here. We've talked about him before, but is the case for trading him now starting to become almost irresistible in Minnesota, do you think? And what might result from that? He obviously has a no trade clause, so that's a not insignificant barrier to be overcome. It certainly appeared from the Netflix series that the Cousins very much like life in Minnesota and may not be up for moving to New York or Atlanta, another potential destination that's been mentioned. What do you think it would take for that to happen? And is it going to prove a move that just makes too much sense not to?
There should happen and will happen, and it should happen, right? Because the Jets got the victory, and deserved victory, but it wasn't because of Zach Wilson. It was in spite of Zach Wilson. I mean, let's not forget the end of the first half where he just has no awareness of the clock whatsoever. He throws a pass that he should never have thrown, and then there's absolutely kind of no urgency on his part to get it going. And he's going up against a historically bad Broncos defense. But I just don't think Aaron Rodgers, now maybe he wants to go into the debating sphere, and maybe that will take his attention rather than quarterbacking. If people haven't seen it, he's challenged Travis Kelce to a debate this evening. But I don't see him allowing them to do it, even though Cousins could be traded. He could go to the Jets, he could play out the year there,
but
and he's
not going to be needed, Colin, because Aaron Rodgers is going to be back by week 8. He's going to make himself better with his awesome mental powers. Like, have you not been listening to Pat McAfee?
I have about
he can manifest himself better. This is Aaron Rodgers we're talking about.
Yeah, reading Eckhart Tolle and The Secret. I did that too. I attracted a house to myself with money. Amazing what you can do. But look, let's be real about this. The Jets would be in an infinitely better place if they had Kirk Cousins. And the Falcons would be in a better place. But I don't think Rodgers allows it to happen. And I think Arthur Smith, the Falcons won't do it. I think Desmond Ridder has probably bought himself enough time, so they're unlikely to do it. So we're going to see him. He might like life in Minnesota, but I don't think he's going to be in Minnesota next year. And it could have been like a Robin Van Persie-esque move where it could be the final piece to take somebody over the hump. But I don't think the NFL is in that space as yet. You see it sometimes happen in the NBA where teams will bring guys in for a run and then they leave at the end of the year. The NFL isn't there. But I do... you just look at, like, the Jets they've such a good roster for the most part. Obviously they have issues on the line, but they're just going to waste it. Like, Zach Wilson is not the answer. We know that.
Brian, there's a lot of trade speculations swirling around and some juicy names being speculated out there. Everyone from Devontae Adams to Derek Smith to Saquon Barkley even. But a lot of that obviously depends, much as it does in Minnesota, with what happens over the next week or two. Couple of Raiders players, Josh Jacobs, another one that's been thrown out there that a lot of people were saying it'll make sense to move on, but might seem like the Raiders have bought themselves another week. Not sure would the Giants look at getting rid of Saquon Barkley? What do you think of that as a potential move?
I would think it's a really good, decent opportunity chance that the Giants would seriously consider an offer, depending on the next few weeks and how it goes, because
he's probably gone next year anyway.
Well, they don't have any intention of keeping him long term. Like, they're just happy they can tag him again next year. So, and like, is against a lot rounds of possibility to do it again on a 10 million cap hit, or give or take whatever the number is, depending on the average run rate for a running back next year. They will look to tag him again, and it's just the same. You're continuous. You're doing the exact same thing time after time. It doesn't make any sense. I think if an offer, and a fair offer, came in come the deadline, which is a week earlier than normally is, bear in mind, so teams will still have an opportunity to really consider themselves in the hunt for the playoffs. I think the likes of the Ravens, bearing in mind the players that which they've lost in running back position, I think they could be an ideal fit for the like of Barkley. I think even Buffalo would be one that would be under consideration, bearing in mind the relationship which the GM has, having worked there previously, and the strong relationship he has with the existing people up in Buffalo. I think that's another team. I think if the Giants were to fall to 1-6 or 1-7, I think there's a serious consideration for that. I think the Raiders are out of the picture, to be honest, because I think they will win this weekend. So they get back to 500, and I think, whilst they may not realistically be a team that will go to playoffs, I think they'll still be in a competitive position within the AFC hunt for a wild card, and therefore they wouldn't look to move any players. That's how I say it. As for Kirk Cousins, just want to throw it in there. I think he'll be in the AFC East next year, but I think he'll be for the Patriots.
Interesting. Colin, you can't go near any trade speculation at the moment without talk of a potential fire sale in Denver. The case for that is obvious in some respects, but as you've already pointed out, being hamstrung by that Wilson contract might determine otherwise. But you're hearing speculation swirling around Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy. I've heard Frank Clark, Justin Simmons, Garrett Bowles all mentioned as potentially being offloaded or maybe wanting a trade themselves. You think any or all of those are likely?
Well, while we've been on the show, Sean Payton has been at the podium saying, no, absolutely no trades. We're not taking calls. We're going to keep the pieces together. That's essentially the chairman's vote of confidence. That's what I would read into that. I think there will be some movement. I do. But I don't think the Broncos will get the type of offers that they will probably want. So I do think probably one of the receivers will go, whether that's more likely to be Jeudy, I would imagine. I mean, Cortland Sutton is not the receiver that he was. Cortland Sutton was an excellent receiver, but he hasn't been the same since he came back from the ACL injury. And I suppose, like, I think Justin Simmons is fantastic. But will somebody, I think the days of the big safety kind of trades may be behind us. So I don't know whether they would be willing to do that. I'd be very sad to see him go. So I think you'll see some. I do, but I don't think it will be a fire sale. I think you hear this all the time. It's like in the Premier League, and you hear, there's going to be a fire. They're going to move on 10, 12, 14 players in the summer, and they're going to sign a whole new team. It never ends up happening. I do think you'll see some trades happen. Absolutely. I imagine Howie will be active because it's Howie. But for Denver, one, I would say one more. And the only other reason it could be is if there was an absolute spectacular blockbuster trade, but they don't tend to happen mid-season.
Brian, one final one I wanted to throw in before we wrap, and it's an interesting one. People have been talking about whether or not the Titans should have reloaded for one last run to get the band back together. Now they're talking about, well, could Ryan Tannehill or potentially or Derrick Henry be on their way? They're only 2-3 in a division where the leaders are 3-2. Far from out of the fight. Yeah, they've been very up and down, but that seems crazy to me.
I think the Titans are obviously going to be very strong at home. And they've won both their home games this season. I think they'll continue that trend. They'll win home games. Like, they just can't seem to get over the hump on the road. But like what are Jacksonville? They played really well last weekend. They won the 2 games in London. You go me against the Rams, a possibility that the Colts would beat them this weekend. For me, this division is too up and down for the Titans to be getting rid of players at this stage. I think they're better off working with the players that they have. And yeah, maybe at the end of the season, they finally make that decision to move away from Tannehill. But certainly don't think. And if they were to move on from Tannehill now, where did they go? They bring in Will Levis, who, by all accounts was struggling in camp. And then you have the previous quarterback that they brought in last year, the rookie quarterback in the 3rd round, that for large parts of the offseason, people said was going to be a 1st round pick. He drops to the 3rd. Don't think they have a suitable backup even for me. So it just doesn't make any sense. But I see the narrative, I just don't buy into it.
Well, this weekend will be critical also for a lot of teams. You see a lot of the teams that we've been talking about drop one more game, and I think then it really starts to be offloading time for some of them. We'll throw it out there in the social channels, but let us know if there's any trades you'd like to see happen or any that you think will happen before trade deadline day. We'll have plenty more content before then, including, of course, our Thursday picks show, where we reveal who's hot and who's not, and why it is that Aidan, despite saying that he knows nothing about football, still keeps racking up the wins and seems to pick all around him. But that's us for our Tuesday Talking Points. We'll be back with you on the Irish NFL show very soon.